A quick introduction. My name is Jordan Higgins. I've been designing for the web since the 90s, really since the web first took off. I started out in this industry with a really strong interest in how the web connects us, how we can work together. Essentially, I was a music major when I started working with the web, and I got very excited about the possibility of connecting with my other musician friends and playing with them. And then I kind of learned really quickly what bandwidth was. And this was the time of like 28 baud modems. But nowadays I am a XR designer specializing in sort of applying emerging technologies like augmented reality, virtual reality, and then combining them with other technologies like machine learning, artificial intelligence. Finding like where can we really find these opportunities to transform the way that we may have done things previously, and really like kind of bring this technology into out of sort of like this is cool, but into like real world everyday applications. And I think I got my start working with this. I'll go into that in a second. Today, we're going to be talking about creative collaboration in virtual worlds. And one of the things that's really exciting in our industry right now is that we're past the days of like smartphone VR, of seeing, of even we're seeing really rich single player experiences, but we're starting to see more applications where we can interact with each other, where we can share virtual spaces, and not just for gaming applications, but for things like training and for co-creating, things like that. And that's what we're going to talk about here today, and kind of think of as experienced designers, where should we be thinking about opportunities, and how can we use these tools in new ways. And let me go ahead and share the link to the slides here. Anybody who wants to follow along. And one thing that I often like to do with this talk is sometimes just kind of ask people to think about, especially since a lot of us have been inside or quarantined for the past year and a half. Imagine that it's safe to travel anywhere, and you've been asked to facilitate a workshop or kick off, a project or really anything. And you could go, you have unlimited budget, no travel restrictions. Where would you go? Where would you like to go? And actually, if people just want to throw it in the chat, I'd love to see it. We won't spend a lot of time on it as an activity, but it's more, I just kind of get thinking like sky's the limit. Where would you go? What environment would you create or what would you pick to create the perfect space for creating a workshop with people? For me, it would be Falling Water. And Falling Water, for anybody who may not be familiar with it, it's a house that was built on a waterfall by an American architect named Frank Lloyd Wright. It's in Pennsylvania. Deep in the woods, was a vacation home for a wealthy family from Pittsburgh. But one thing that I had the opportunity to do was attend an immersive design workshop residency. This was a 5-day workshop at Falling Water, where we had access to the house after hours. We were doing tours, and the whole idea behind this workshop was to think about how we design immersive experiences, augmented virtual reality, and think about that through the lens of architecture. And the program was put together by a XR professor at Chatham University named Doug Northcook. I'm happy to I think they're planning to do it again in the fall. If anybody's interested, I would be very happy to share the link. I can't recommend it enough. But yeah, so before, real quick side note here, and this is one of my favorite things that I learned while we were there. If anybody's familiar with the movie Die Hard, and this is, I think, often the one thing people remember from this talk. In the movie Die Hard, the lobby of the Nakatomi Tower was meant to literally be falling water. The idea was that that apparently, the Nakatomi Corporation had bought Falling Water and put it in Los Angeles. So next time you see Die Hard, you can actually see all the architectural cues that they took from it. Fun little bit of trivia. Someday that'll help someone win a round of trivia at a contest, but nothing else to do with what we're talking about today. So, but just fun little trivia part. But no, what this workshop was though, was we spent 5 days completely offline and talking about sort of principles of designing immersive spaces and this idea of organic architecture that Frank Lloyd Wright was known for, this idea of creating environments that blend and exist harmoniously with the environment around them. And the thing that becomes so important there when we realize is that when we start to talk about bringing digital content into the real world, whether it's augmented reality where we're enhancing the real world with like holograms, or we're creating entirely virtual environments, we have to think about how people interact with that. We have we're
No, Jordan. Looks like his internet went out again. That is unfortunate. We were just getting into it.
we learned a technique called brown boxing,
Oh,
where I'm sorry, is there a question?
looks like your your internet like went out for a little bit.
Oh no.
Yeah, it looks like you're back now. Hopefully it
Okay.
stays consistent.
I'll keep my fingers crossed. If it goes out again, let me know if I need to repeat something.
Okay.
But so we started to explore this technique that a company called Shell Games uses, and a bunch of other places do too, called brown boxing, where they take physical prototyping and extend it into the real world. And this is where when we're thinking about designing an immersive space, anybody who may have, if you've started working with 3D at all, you realize that it's very time consuming, often has a steep learning curve. And Shell Games introduced this concept of brown boxing to us, so that, same way that we do prototyping with real world projects, we do it fast, we do it inexpensively, we learn our mistakes early on, and then we validate those prototypes with actual user testing. But they call it play testing, but same idea. Play testing sounds a little more fun. But again, we were thinking, this was all hands-on real world spaces. This was a prototype of an undersea game experience that we came up with that afternoon. And one of the other things we did is we studied an essay by an architect named Juhani Palasma. And this is where really started to think about how important thinking like an architect can be when we start to think about designing virtual world spaces or augmenting the real world. He has a quote in this article. It's focused on how we experience buildings and physical spaces through our senses. And this one line in particular really jumped out at me about how the door handle is the handshake of the building. And when you think about that, there's a reason why when we come home or we go to work or we interact with doors that we're familiar with, it feels comfortable to us. Our memories are formed around the experience of opening that door. We know, exactly how much force needs to be applied. If the door sticks, we may know that too. There's a lot of comfort in familiar spaces when we interact with the door. And then also when we're in a new space, before we even make physical contact with the building, we can see, our senses kind of combined here to put a lot of things together for us. Does this door look heavy? Is it modern? Once I actually touch it, does it stick at all? Is it really heavy? Is it lighter than I expect? Do we end up in sort of a classic Norman door situation where it looks like I should pull, but I end up pushing, things like that. But the thing that really stuck out to me was thinking about, so much of the interactions that we've designed with for traditional applications involve clicking a mouse, from experience to experience, or tapping on a screen or on a keyboard. From experience to experience, there's not a lot of variability there. But when we start to think about designing an XR, what we're seeing now is this ability with devices like the HoloLens 2 and the Oculus Quest. The capability is there to really detect where our hands are in space and time, and to sync up our physical actions with digital objects. So it enables us to create much richer interactions and new interactions that even if we're interacting with something like, a physical controller, there's another element to here where, you know, we've scratched the surface of this with traditional applications where, you know, we can tap on a button and it can animate, or it could come to life, or it'll highlight on rollover, things like that. With the controllers, or with even just our hands ourselves, we can start to add in things, animation in a spatial context. We can add spatial audio. We can add haptic feedback. We can start to engage on more senses. And when the more senses we engage with, the more powerful associations will be formed in our memory. And it varies based on what application we may be trying to do. You know, whether it's a training application where we want people to remember a certain sequence of events, or if we're trying to tell an immersive story and we want, you know, key points of the story to really have impact, and we want people to form memories around key message points. Whatever we're trying to do, this becomes a very powerful set of tools in the toolkit. And we really, you know, it really starts to drive home, you know, when we put a digital object in the world around us, how might someone expect to interact with that? And what we're looking at here is a toolkit that Microsoft put out called the Mixed Reality Toolkit. And the Mixed Reality Toolkit is meant to be a bunch of reusable components. When I started working with the HoloLens 5 years ago, we built, you know, everybody was kind of building their own version of this, and, you know, would incur a lot of technical and design debt early in a project, because you'd have to kind of figure out how to do all these things. Over the years, Microsoft and the community have kind of come together to put together this framework for you know, common interactions. You know, everything from, you know, creating boxes where you can manipulate things in size and space, virtual piano keyboards. You know, we can create, you know, very familiar interactions like pushing a button or playing piano, or picking up an object and rotating it in our hand, interacting with forms, or we could create entirely new interactions that people don't expect. And that's where, you know, there's a lot of opportunity for really fun, interactions. One of my favorite with the HoloLens 2 is when you first boot it up, when it's sort of orienting and getting your eye measurements and things like that, you have a virtual hummingbird that flies around and lands in your hand, right? This is something, and there's a little bit of like feedback and audio associated with it. You hear it land on your hand, you see it, things change as it interacts with you. You know, the opportunity for very powerful, you know, moments. Microsoft calls them magic moments. And these are moments that are specifically designed with intent to be memorable. But that's something that we can start thinking about as experience designers, to add into our digital experiences and our augmented experiences. And so, you know, effectively, you know, if we think about that door as the handshake of a building, these interactions, when we can start interacting with our hands or with voice, and have, you know, real world properties that are associated with that, touch, hearing, vision, combining on multiple senses, we have a lot of the same potential that architects do in being very intentional about the experiences that we're creating for people and how they may be remembered. So let's take just a step back though. People have wanted to simulate reality for a very, very long time. One of the earliest ideas of sort of goggles comes from a science fiction short story called Pygmalion Spectacles, that involves somebody being able to kind of see, you know, things that weren't really there, but when they wore these glasses. And then, you know, fast forward another 30 years, there's a device called the Sensorama that same idea was designed to replace reality. Now, as you can tell, comparing that to something like, you know, the Oculus Quest, very different ball games, but the ideas are very similar. There was vision, there was spatial audio, there was haptic feedback and the ability to manipulate things in the environment. It's come a long, long way. For me, this moment was Tron. In 1982, I was 9 years old, and I just became fascinated with the idea that in digital worlds inside the computer, I think I had a Commodore VIC-20 that I was learning to program on, but the idea that there were entire worlds inside that computer that could interact with us and had their own, you know, rules for being. I just became captivated by this idea of being able to go into the computer and then, you know, vice versa, or like that blending of reality. Um, I think fast forward to 1995, I was a music major. I was learning HTML as the web had come about. The idea was that I wanted to be able to jam and play music with my friends. And I remember one of the first virtual worlds that I came across was something called Alpha World. And as you can see, this looks like a very primitive, like Minecraft even. But it was a virtual world. It was, through a client-based application, no headset or anything like that. But you had the ability to share a virtual world space and then create inside of it. You could use simple 3D objects, textures, rectangles, walls, things like newspaper stands were used to at the time the web was largely information pages. So they had this sort of interface paradigm of a newsstand where you could go and then pull up in a web browser the web page, that was associated with that box. And people started to, it was very, very, very like when it first started, it was, complete like Wild West frontier. It was, you sort of were dumped out into this large open landscape, and any place that wasn't built on, you could start building a house. And eventually what would happen is, like cities started to form, people started to build next to each other. But some of my favorite memories of first getting online were just kind of building in this sort of virtual space. And then you can see in the top left here, you had avatars that were, represented other people that would sometimes float by. There was really not much motion. It was kind of like a simple walking thing, but you could move up, you could fly up and down, left and right. And people would just kind of float by, and sometimes they would land next to you and you'd start talking. I was again, I was a student down in like Southwest Virginia, and I was talking to computer scientists and early 3D programmers and all sorts of like academics who were in complete other countries. It completely blew my mind about sort of the potential for, not just connecting on things like, news groups or email, but having the spatial context where we could actually start building together, or somebody might, provide feedback on your design, or you would just, see something that somebody did that's pretty cool and it would strike a conversation. This ability to create together, while very primitive, was a whole nother level of the internet for me. So fast forward to today, this technology is a lot more accessible, and there's a lot cooler things that you can do with it. In this animation here, we're seeing Microsoft's Mesh demo. Mesh is their idea, as sort of their concept of a metaverse where people can work and share spaces together. And sort of bottom line, and I think this is one thing that really gets reinforced now in this, sort of post-pandemic world, endless Zoom meetings can be, especially anybody who's teaches can also relate to this, or has taken a class online. It's very, very difficult, after a couple of hours, especially, to feel engaged and to it's a very sort of one-way flow of information back and forth. When you can actually interact with things together, working, learning, all those things can be a lot more fun. And the other big factor that is why we're seeing this be successful now, or we're starting to see it be more widespread, there's a lot less friction. The ability to sort of onboard either through a web browser onside a mobile headset or through a desktop web browser. Not everybody has to have a HoloLens or a VR headset. There's, people can work together in shared spaces across different devices. Simply by clicking a link and using some of the web paradigms that we're already familiar with, makes it a lot easier to onboard. Some of the early the onboarding and the setup that was involved was often prohibitive. Now we're seeing the ability to create virtual worlds that people can be dropped right in and start interacting with within right away. And ultimately, this idea that we can reduce travel, we can get a lot of our work done more effectively and efficiently in spatial experiences across great distances. Now, there's not any substitute for in-person interaction, right? Like there's always going to be that need for it, and that's always going to be different. But when we can do more and more effectively, when we can have more of that sense of presence with each other, when it's not practical to travel or possible to travel, there's a lot of potential there that we're going to see, especially over the next couple of years as Apple and Facebook and Snap, all these major players are creating their own sort of metaverse environments. So when we think about, creating virtual workspaces, here's one that I created from my old company, U Group. This was early on in the pandemic, and we were all kind of very, isolated. We missed being outside. We missed being with each other. So we created in a platform called Mozilla Hubs, a virtual campfire environment where we could just hang out. And I created a small gamified experience where we hid like polygon, 3D animals in the forest, and had sort of a scavenger hunt type of activity, just to give people something different and novel to do. And I would say it had an interesting, maybe it's all good 2 or 3 years worth, or years, 2 or 3 weeks worth of use, where people would sometimes jump in and we saw a couple people have meetings. It didn't really take off as much as I was kind of hoping it would, but it was interesting. Here, welcoming everybody to the first ever, I'm going to go ahead and mute this. But Accenture has actually gone in Microsoft AltSpace and created an entire onboarding and co-working environment called Infloor that they've been using, where people can create avatars and interact with each other. And this has taken off there like gangbusters. And I think one of the things that's so interesting about this is that the reason that it was adopted was, one, it had support at the organization, and they created activities that could only be done in this environment that worked well with this environment. One of the questions when we're designing any XR experiences, why is this better in XR versus doing something in a traditional Zoom meeting? If it's not, then it's really not worth doing, and it's not gonna take off. But in this case, they actually created things that replaced traditional in-person interactions in a way that was unique and engaging, that actually saw, aside from sort of, manager level, instructions to use it, it was something that people really found a lot of value in. Okay, so another example here from Microsoft's, Mesh. Here they're actually showing, bridge inspections, this idea that with LiDAR equipped drones, they can go out, create a very high resolution scan of a bridge, and then engineers can go in and share a virtual environment just by sitting at their desk. They don't have to travel on site. They don't have to rappel down the side of a building. Basically, as soon as that drone can process the image, they can jump into this shared virtual space and start doing a lot of their inspection tasks. And the technology now is at a level where, one, that interaction is fast enough and high fidelity enough, but also the quality of the capture is supports that as well. So next we have this idea of, that's sort of how we can, we have these different platforms that provide high fidelity and quality enough experiences that can support shared interactions. Next, we're looking at this idea of, well, how do we represent ourselves in these virtual worlds? So I know, one of the things that's been kind of fun about the pandemic, as much as I could say it's fun, is that we've had a chance to kind of see, other people's workspaces, and we've seen, this idea of it probably doesn't take too much to figure out that I am a fan of Legos and Star Wars, right? There's a lot of things about my personality that come across just in my setting. But in these virtual environments, one of the big things that comes out is this ability for people to represent themselves and express themselves through their avatars. In this example, where Microsoft held their Ignite conference in AltSpace and set up this virtual red conference, and I kind of was just, actually what I do at real conferences too. I kind of just hang back and try to avoid interacting. But it was really interesting to see how people kind of flocked around this sort of selfie station in a virtual setting, and groups of people got together. They were taking posed screenshots, things like that. These things that were traditional interactions that you really don't translate too well to things like Zoom meetings or mural boards or things like that. But then creating something that's sort of unique to this experience. Let me move a little bit faster because I know we're running up on time. This is another platform called Spatial. They've gone for a very high fidelity. They are 100% focused on collaboration and creating shared spaces. Also works in VR headsets, desktops, web browser environments, On the HoloLens, it's a very, very interesting experience where you can kind of project these virtual panels in the world with you. People who are on their camera can also be sort of beamed in as a panel. But one thing about their avatar creator, it's very fast. If you log in and upload a picture or take a picture, within seconds you're going to get a avatar representation of yourself. Now, this one was a little bit scary. I definitely did a lot of tweaking. I learned that taking glasses off is a good call when creating it. But it's interesting to see just how far this avatar process has come to get something more realistic. And then in other platforms, Verbella is another huge space for co-working or collaboration in virtual worlds. A lot of different options with more coming out every day. The idea that people can not necessarily, you can choose how you represent and express yourself, and this gives people a lot of sense of control of freedom. This even goes back to some of our fundamental usability heuristics of giving people that ability to freely build their avatar, with more customization options. I go for realistic, but really it's also interesting to see just how what people do. Ready Player Me is another avatar creator. You can this one creates an avatar file that can be used on different platforms, especially like Mozilla Hubs. So one of the reasons why, and I know we're almost up to time, I'll go a little bit quickly here. Creating content for XR is getting a lot easier. I think it's definitely important to if you're interested in this space, to learn some of the fundamentals. There's a great class called 3D for Designers that focuses on Cinema 4D. It's included with After Effects if you have, there's a light version of it. It's a great place to start and to learn 3D concepts about thinking in 3 different axes. But we're also seeing other technologies emerging, this ability to kind of create and sculpt 3D content in 3D. If you've got a VR headset, you've got a very powerful 3D content platform that you can actually create and manipulate in real time. And more importantly, the power of these tools, 20 years ago, it was hugely expensive and required a very technical level of knowledge to get familiar with these. Now these technologies are getting much more democratized. And the other big trend that I'm really, really excited about is Webxr. With the 3.js 3D JavaScript library, we're seeing the ability to create and deploy augmented and virtual reality experiences in the web browser that are, basically let you create experiences across all sorts of different devices and platforms. For Mozilla Hubs, you have the ability to create environments inside an easy-to-use web-based editor. And once you start working with these platforms, you're going to notice a lot of the interfaces will start to look familiar in terms of creating, assets and being able to position them and then adding behaviors. But Mozilla Hubs is a great free web-based session to get started. Also, with the latest iPhone with the LiDAR scanner, this is demonstrating how Sketchfab created an annotated, office tour within, minutes by just doing a scan with their phone. This is something that, even a year ago, 2 years ago, would have been much more time consuming. This is, anybody that's got an iPhone 12 Pro, you've got a very powerful 3D environment creator right in your pocket. There's also some really exciting opportunities for accessibility and inclusion. And here we're seeing that Spatial, just recently added this ability to do real-time live captioning. And there's some other great things that are going on. I actually just recently joined the W3C working committee on Webxr. And they're, it's exciting right now to see so much attention being paid to standards and accessibility this early in an emerging technology. But there's another couple of links here. XR Access is a community initiative designed, to try to make immersive experiences more accessible. And then Ally VR is a fantastic meetup. It's run out of Tokyo, but they hold all of their meetups in Mozilla Hubs or Altspace. And it's actually just a great community, but it's also a good place to see actual multi-user interactions to get started. So key takeaways, I think now's the time. The people that we work with are likely going to be increasingly remote as companies are even starting to come back now. We're hearing more and more that even, the model is going to be more, maybe a few days of work, days a week rather than every day of the week. And to that end, it's a good time for, for application designers and people that, do create spaces for collaboration, there's a lot of potential in these tools out here for us. So it's a good time to become familiar with the 3D design and spatial audio principles. And I think the other thing that I would definitely encourage people to do is look out, think about where there's new opportunities here to engage people. There is a lot of remote fatigue, and when you introduce some of these tools, it can really be engaging and energizing. And across the board, it's really exciting to see the major players in this industry right now really focus heavily on creating new opportunities for accessibility. For people that are, there's a lot of talk right now about how remote work is now opening up new opportunities for people that had, disability-related challenges in working before. These remote workspaces can, I think, can further serve to help, level that playing field and give people more opportunities. So finally, there's a, I put together a document here for XR and AI resources that are, in general, like I often get a lot of questions about how do I get started. There's some helpful links here, and it's got my contact info. I'm happy to, if anybody's doing something with this stuff, I'm always happy to see it and learn more about what people are doing. But with that, thank you very much for listening to the talk. Elijah, thank you again so much for asking me. I hope that went through, that people heard most of that at least. But with that, thank you. And if we have time, I'd be happy to answer questions.
Yeah, that was great. Absolutely fantastic. We had no more internet problems after that. So yeah, it's all good on that end. So yeah, I hope you all have questions, because I think this is amazing information. Maybe that's why it's so much, you and Alita do such great jobs of just, getting right to the meat of the situation. People can just dive into that if they want to learn more. But I do have to say on that the hub space, what's it called? I think I said that wrong.
Mozilla Hub.
Mozilla Hub, yes. Have you heard of the new gel app they're producing? So Greg Fodor, he's one of the founders, one of the main developers of Hubs. He's creating this gel app. So I asked that because there seems to be a push for 3D web spaces, right? So it's not fully VR, AR, anything like that. But what do you see the role of these kind of 3D spaces that you can access on your desktop or your phone?
So I think, right now, not everybody is going to have an Oculus headset, right? But many people have tablets or desktop computers or, devices with a web browser on them where they can navigate through 3D spaces. So, platforms like Gel, and actually I should include that in this talk too, and maybe I'll do a longer version of it or work it in somewhere else. But Gel, Hubs, platforms like that are really trying to put, to I think demystify a lot of the coding requirements around creating spaces, while also baking in, sound interaction patterns, accessibility features, trying to make it as easy as possible for non-technical creators to create high quality, shared experiences that we can navigate and engage in 3D. And I think just as a broad principle, a 3D space that we can navigate in, whether, it's inside of a web browser, like a traditional game that we might play, or whether we're experiencing it at scale in a headset, both of those sort of formats are more dynamic and engaging than just a traditional 2D sort of environment. Now, I mean, of course, it depends on what you're trying to do, right? Like it's not necessarily the right solution for everything. If you're trying to file your taxes, you probably don't want to navigate a, Call of Duty style game to do that, right? But for the right applications, and I think that's where we have to think about, where do these environments add value, and where do they actually enhance, that human experience and support those interactions in sort of meaningful ways. But yeah, those tools are, both are, one, making them free, making them easy to use, making them accessible. Yeah, Gel, Mozilla, there's some, some other sort of like community efforts there. And I think, to the question that you were asking, during, Alethea's section, why, I had similar frustrations with the Magic Leap, right? Like I luckily I could wear the HoloLens 1 with my glasses. But the Magic Leap, it was just, I was constantly seeing things blurry, and you had to buy like a $300 kit. I think, at that point, the hard problems they were trying to solve was, how do we even make these 3D holograms stable? How do we create synchronized, things that are refreshing at a fast enough rate that they don't make people sick? These displays were a huge, technical challenge, and they were trying to figure out, how do we figure that out? And then with as the devices get lower cost, as they figure out some of those initial hurdles, now you're seeing, so that this is where I actually, it'll be interesting to see what Magic Leap does with their next gen. But with Microsoft, if you go through their mixed reality documentation, the emphasis on accessibility on ergonomics, and even just, they have a whole website just on their philosophy towards inclusive design. I think ultimately, the vision for a lot of this stuff is that it's as easy as putting on a regular pair of glasses, and it's able to support us, whatever works best for us, whether it's hand interactions. I realize I'm kind of like long-winded answer here, but it's all sort of incremental progress on this, I think longer term journey of, how can we create these experiences and interact with these experiences without needing a degree in computer science, without, how can we focus on the stories that we're trying to tell, or the environment that we're trying to create for people, and not let the technical aspects of that be the barrier that it's been for a long time.
Thank you for that answer. Yeah, I do think that is a great point as well. Is making them more not just accessible, both in terms of accessibility as well as in terms of access to the technology, and being able to use it, being able to create with it. So I do think that's a great point there. And Letha in the chat, she asked, have you tried the VR version of Verbula yet? And how is it? She says one of her teams is in 2D. So how's that
Yeah,
experience?
it's cool. It's cool. Verbella is one of the, I think the really exciting platforms out there to me, particularly their Frame version, which is their Webxr version of Verbella. The client application that you install, can the VR version of that works. I think the VR ones that I've done have been more in the Frame environment than in the Verbella client app. But it's very cool. Like the and the interface that they've created around creating a web VR world. Very simple interaction. It's definitely much easier to onboard. Than sort of asking somebody to go to an app store and download a total environment, things like that. Yeah, it's got a lot of potential. They're doing some really cool stuff with the Webxr side of things, and specifically focusing on work and education as sort of like two key verticals. So for instructors, being able to create virtual classrooms, or companies looking to create virtual either meeting spaces or retail environments. It definitely, a lot of this stuff, it does feel very early days. Like there's definitely things that you'll be like, well, that's, maybe that could be a little better, or I really wish it could do that. So I try to, and this is where I get really excited about like where it may be going, and maybe not just as much as what it's doing right now today, but it's really promising. It's really, and especially that ability to interact with somebody who, like, if I'm in my headset, but I'm interacting with a student or a colleague who's at their laptop, that's a pretty cool experience, and to be able to do that just in a web page is pretty awesome.
Yeah, it definitely is. It definitely is. Thank you so very much once again. Letha said, yeah, it made a big difference during lockdown living alone. Like, yeah, that sort of collaboration it really is incredible. That sort of presence. And I'm definitely looking forward to having more and more of that, getting better with it, and just that accessibility. I know a lot of people are on that track. So for all the people that are listening to this in the recording, feel free to take a look at his presentation. Hopefully, it would be shared in the description. If not, you can always reach out to Jordan on his LinkedIn here, to Aletha from before, and yeah, thank you all for listening. Thank you all for tuning in. And Jordan, do you have anything else you want to say before we leave out?
I know, just thanks again, and yeah, I look forward to seeing people in virtual worlds at some point.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. So we'll see you all shortly for the next talk with Ube. And thank you all once again for tuning in. Have a great day. See ya.